Now, a little bit of quick context. Don't want to rehash anything too much, but previously Paul travels from Miletus to Caesarea. It's a southern trip, long boat journey. It's like 400 miles. If you were here last week, remember it was about the distance between taking a boat from here, right here, to South Carolina. Very long voyage. Then he gets to Caesarea. You got a prophet named Agabus who prophesies some more doom and gloom for Paul. Takes his belt, binds him up. It's kind of weird a little bit. And then after that, everybody that Paul is with, all the believers that are there in Caesarea with him, and the ones that he have brought with him on this trip, they kind of dogpile on him and pretty much beg him not to go to Jerusalem all the way because of the prophecies, and they've heard it too over and over and over again. Paul has had some bad news about what might happen to him if he actually goes all the way to Jerusalem. Well, Paul stands his ground, ultimately, and the companions give up and give in to what is really God's will on the matter. Whatever God would have done with the situation, that's what they give up to. And Paul tells them that he's ready to die in Jerusalem if he needs to. Now, today, Paul makes it to Jerusalem. And last week, I didn't read the last couple verses 15 and 16, but they say, after these days, we got ready and went up to Jerusalem. And the phrase that's going on there kind of means usually like a horseback trip, like they packed up some horses and got ready to go. That would have been a roughly 60-mile trip on horseback to get to Jerusalem from that point. Continuing on, and some of the disciples from Caesarea went with us, bringing us to the house of Manasseh of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we should lodge. And the whole early disciple thing could mean potentially that he was a disciple of even back when Jesus was roaming the earth, or it could mean that potentially he was a disciple that had arisen from maybe Paul's missionary journeys or whatnot. Scholars are a little divided on that one. So Paul makes it to Jerusalem, and what is he going to do there? He's going to report to the church. And then we essentially have some craziness that ensues in our passage. So there's a lot to sort out here, but there's a lot of good stuff to get out of it. So looking at verse 17, this is kind of diving in here. I'm going to read, and then we'll kind of flesh it out a little. When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. And if you'll notice there, when we had come to Jerusalem, right, the band is kind of back together, if you will. Everybody's on the same page, and we're all going to Jerusalem. 18, on the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God. Now, let me stop and give you guys a couple pieces here. Go back to 19. It says, he related one by one the things that God had done. The word related there is literally narrated. And if you know anything about Paul, he might have taken a while doing that narration. You flip back to chapter 20, and we have Eutychus falling out of the window because he fell asleep during one of Paul's messages, essentially, and dies in the process. Now, Paul raises him from the dead miraculously through the power of Jesus Christ. But, so, all that to give us a little bit of an idea of what's going on here. Paul probably talked for a little while when he did this. Now, a question comes out of this that I asked myself. They glorified God when they heard this, right? What does that mean? What does that look like, that they glorified God? Now, in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the usages of glorify, I'm going to spare you some of the wonderful, juicy details that everybody loves to fall asleep during, and boil it down for you, boiling down to essentially to a theme of giving credit and thanks and honor to whom credit and thanks and honor are due. So that is kind of the essence of what glorifying God looks like, giving credit to him, giving thanks to him, and giving honor to him when it is due. Now, the word glorify itself is an idea of magnifying, right? So it's like it's raising it up. It's to celebrate even, you could say. And this word itself, too, indicates a period of time. So this happened for a while. This wasn't just like, they threw their hands up, their hands went down, and then they moved on with their day. No, this was an extended period of time of glorifying God. Now, Let's kind of distill this a little bit. We glorify God today by giving him honor, thanks, and credit he is due when it is due, and that magnifies him. Now, what I just said there kind of begs a question. Well, when is it due? When should we give it to him? Well, you wake up another day. He's due honor and thanks for the fact that your heart that is ticking, that scientists really don't exactly know how to explain why it ticks like it ticks, other than they say, electricity and all this different stuff. You wake up another day. How about you suffer an accident or health issues? It's one thing to thank him and glorify him in the good stuff, but in the bad stuff too. Job 13:15 says, "Though he slay me, I will hope in him." And slay there, that word slay, you can rephrase it to mean essentially, though he cuts me off from everything that is good. You can replace it and just plug it right in there. Though he cuts me off from everything I think that is good, I will hope. And hope is like this idea of I will wait patiently for him. I will wait on him, though he does all that to me. I don't know what issues you might be going through today. I'm sure there's some. We all have something. But what does that mean for your life? Think about that. And it's a reprogramming of the mind too, isn't it? To kind of have that thought in the negative. It's easy to do it in the positive, but to do it in the negative takes practice. And it takes the power of God, essentially, to do so. Now, let's continue on here. This is verse 20 continued. And this is a little bit of a shift in the conversation. If you're reading along and paying close attention, they kind of glorify God, and then they shift real quick. And there's a period of time that probably passes here, and that's why that shift happens. And they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands are among the Jews, those who have believed." And that means believed in Jesus. And how many thousands? That's a figure of speech. That word could literally mean tens of thousands. The idea is a huge, huge number. "They are all zealous for the law, and they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come." Now, is what the elders just said to Paul really true of Paul? Did Paul really teach the Jews to forsake Moses here? It's a question. It's a legitimate question to ask and answer. Short answer to that question is no, he did not. He did not teach that. And if we flesh that out just a little bit, what the elders are saying there is not that they are grouping themselves into this understanding and this word of who Paul is. What they're doing is they're trying to explain to Paul the pickle that he's essentially in coming to Jerusalem. And that's because of this information that has been spread about him. You got to remember, Paul's been gone for some 3 years. Now he comes back. These guys have been here. They're relaying to him and giving him this sticky situation that Paul finds himself in. So, now, where do I get that from? I want to just kind of defend that for a second. I don't just want to throw that at you and be like, look, I got it. How did I get that? Number one, Paul never tells anyone they must forsake. And there's a Greek word there, and if I said it, it sounds exactly like apostatize. It's almost identically sounding. And that word is what's being used there, apostatize, to forsake Moses' teaching. And remember, Moses' teaching, a.k.a. the first 5 books of the Bible, okay, in their entirety. Is that what Paul was teaching? No, he never taught that. Now, here's the little bit of the distinction here. This is where they were getting tripped up, and where people can get tripped up on this too. He was preaching against the reliance on the law for justification, okay? So he was not preaching to forsake it in its entirety. He was preaching to forsake your dependence on it for your right standing with God. He never says you have to throw away your Jewish heritage. Romans 3:28, "For we hold that one is justified or held blameless before God by faith apart from works in the law." Galatians 2:16. These are just some examples of things that Paul has said and taught. Yet we know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. So we also have believed in Christ Jesus, in order to be justified by faith in Christ and not by works of the law. How many times can he say it over and over and over again, right? It's just repeating it and repeating it. Because by the works of the law, no one will be justified. So he never actually teaches an apostasy, bless you, he never teaches an apostasy from the books of Moses, the Torah. Now, second little point here that's important, he actually has Timothy circumcised. Anybody remember that? Back in chapter 16. And why does he do it? Because of the Jewish influence that is in the area. He's attempting to avoid unnecessary contention with Timothy's ministry. So, yet again, he is not anti-Torah. Now, we summarize all this to say what the Jews have been told about Paul has been false. It's false. This was a textbook #misinformation campaign that has been spread against Paul throughout the region. I don't know, is anybody else like sick of hearing the word misinformation and disinformation? Like, I don't think, number one, anybody really knows what it means, first of all. They just say it at this point. It's like, it's lying or it's telling the truth. It's like, it's that simple. We don't need these fancy misinformations and disinformations so that we can make up new words and make people confused. And every time I hear it, I just want to, like, I don't know. I want to do things that are sinful and wrong. I know I'm going to step off of that soapbox, come down. It's a very tall soapbox in my life. Come down off of it and back to this. It's a mini point here. This is a mini point that I'm going to draw out of these last couple verses that we've talked about. You cannot control what people say about you. So don't live your life trying to. Be kind, be loving, be honest, be a gospel light, and let people say what they will about you. Quit living your life to make everyone love you. Live your life in a way instead that makes God love you. Okay? Very important point. People spend a lot of their lives unknowingly attempting to make people happy around them and make them like them. Waste of time. Even when you're trying to do all the right stuff, even worrying about it, I struggle with it too. Make sure I'm not misunderstood. I can't control what people think about me. That's the last thing that I can control is what people think about me. Don't waste your time. Instead, devote your time in God's word and God himself. And I read there, live your life in a way that makes God love you. And I just want to sidebar, you can't make God love you by your works. Okay, I just want to throw that sidebar in there because some people can maybe run away with that. Don't run away with that. You only are righteous in God's eyes through faith in Jesus Christ. That is the only way that anyone can be restored to a relationship with God. All right, let's keep moving. Because every time I go through this, I realize how many verses there are, and there's a lot of verses. Verse 23, do therefore what we tell you. Now, this is kind of another little section here. The last chunks that we just looked at is one section. This is kind of a section 2, if you will, that we're about to dive into. So they have a plan now to kind of counteract these lies that are going around about Paul. I almost said misinformation. I caught myself there. Lies. Do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourself along with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. Haircuts on Paul. Thus, all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you, but that you yourself also live in observance of the law. You yourself, whenever you see that in English, the translators are picking that out on purpose because there's a certain construction in Greek that's going on there that is like the most emphatic way you can possibly say to somebody something. It's like, I don't know, the best way it was ever described to me is somebody's pointing their finger at you while they're saying it. Like, you need to, like, this is very serious what I'm saying to you, this is important. So, now, all of this begs another question. Is this like Operation Fool the Jews in Jerusalem? Is that what the elders are prescribing here? Is this like a cover-up? Is that what we're trying to do? What's going on here with this suggestion? And then a second little sub-question to that is what's the deal with the vow situation here? What's going on with that? Is that important? Why is that important? What kind of vow are we even talking about? Now, the answer to the first question, is this Operation Fool the Jews in Jerusalem? The answer to that question, as you may have guessed, is no. This is not some sort of a cover-up that they are proposing. And if you just think that through, cover-ups kind of imply untruthfulness, right? So they wouldn't be doing that. This is an opportunity to let actions speak louder than words. So kind of restated, Paul, let's let your actions do the talking in refuting all of this lies that has come about you, and instead we're going to do this thing instead of speak against it. Now, not a cover-up. Answer to your second question, because I know you asked it. What's going on with the vows? Everybody wants to know about the vows. It's not a marriage vow. Paul is both participating financially and physically in a vow here, okay? Now, let me explain this a little bit, because there's actually two vows that are kind of happening here at once. Paul is participating in the vow of the four other men by paying their vow expenses, okay? Now, by the way, Barbara, I have safety mints on me today. I told my wife, because if you saw last week, I almost choked to death up here, and she saved me with a Hall's lozenge, and I was good to go. So I have what I'm calling safety mints on me today in case anything goes wrong. So what is the vow exactly? Well, it's a Nazirite vow, more than likely, that these men are going through. And what exactly is that? Well, it's not just paying for haircuts, because that's what it looks like when you read that. It's like, it's haircuts. That's it. No, it's not just haircuts. It's a roughly 30-day period of strict dietary rules and purification rules. I'm going to spare you some of the details there. But, interestingly enough, that goes along with the paying for the haircut thing. At the end of these Nazirite vows, you had to offer a multiplicity of things to God to finish it. You had to offer a year-old male lamb. You had to offer a year-old ewe lamb. I guess that's like a gross lamb or something like that, an ewe lamb. You had to offer a ram, not the truck. You had to offer a basket of bread. You couldn't get it from Olive Garden. And then you also had to offer various kinds of drink and grain offerings. So what's the point of all that? Why do I even tell you that? Why do I even bore you with that information? Well, it's expensive. This Nazirite vow thing that they're telling Paul to do, to pay for, it's very expensive. I didn't price all this out because I felt like that would be getting too nerdy for everybody, but it's a lot. It's a lot. So it takes some serious commitment for Paul to sponsor this, essentially. That's what they're asking him to do. Paul, sponsor these four men in this Nazirite vow. Now, the second part here, what is Paul actually participating in? Well, he is actually participating in what is a purification ritual, most likely, that lasts about 7 days or so, okay? And that particular ritual, that more than likely what he's participating in, is a ritual that would be done for a Jew who leaves the Holy Land, Jerusalem and all that, and goes out into Gentile areas and spends time out there, and then comes back into the Holy Land. They would consider you unclean at that point. You can't go in the temple and do all your normal temple stuff without doing this purification ritual at the same time. So, or beforehand, not at the same time. So that is what Paul is actually participating in right there. So it's not a cover-up operation, because again, that would imply deceiving locals, and we're not doing that. However, it is an attempt to display genuine sensitivity toward the cultural context of this region. That is the Jews. Now, mini point here. Kind of a mini point, because there is a major point that I'm going to drive at here as we get going on and through this. Mini point here, though. We should care about other believers' consciences. It's really that plain and that simple. We should care about other believers' consciences. A believer, if we kind of apply this here, believers shouldn't purposely flaunt liberties, and other believers, shouldn't purposefully boast in restraints that they have and they keep themselves to. For example, like, we've been enlightened to wear jeans in our church, and if you wear a suit, you are a buffoon. No, that's wrong. If you think like that, I'm telling you right now, that's wrong. Don't think like that. Or another one, our ministry or our music only uses the 7 sacred instruments as outlined in the 57th Psalm of our Lord. That's wrong too. Don't think like that. You should not think like that. That is not okay. That is not gospel way of thinking. That is not a biblical way of thinking. You have a bias at that problem, and you have an internal problem that's going on inside of you. Summary of this. Care about other believers' consciences. Just care about their consciences. Moving on. Verse 25. But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, from blood, and from what has been strangled, and sexual immorality. Now, does this list sound familiar to anybody who has been following this study with us? And if it does to you, 10 points to you. Apparently, that's like a Harry Potter thing. They say that in Harry Potter as they're walking around like, hey, 10 points. And I had no idea. Harry Potter stole that from me. I'm going to get in contact with J.K. Rowling about this because that's my thing. And I had no idea. Sarah told me about it. And I was like, no, you can't ruin this for me. It's my thing. I'm keeping it until they come after me and then I'll switch it up. Okay, now let me keep going here. Where did this come from? Where have we seen this before? Well, this is a reiteration by the Jewish elders of the same thing that they decided to write to the Gentiles back in Acts 15. So if you want a recap of that, go read Acts 15 and you'll see that it's there. This was at the Jerusalem Council, and it was in defense, essentially, of the Judaizers who were telling the Gentiles, hey, you have to strictly follow the law of Moses in order to be saved. So go back, Acts 15, if you want to see that. Now, I do need to answer a question here, and I feel like it would be amiss if I didn't just at least state a little bit of why lay these burdens on the Gentile believers. Just a refresher here. Number one, James himself says back in 15:19 that we should not make it difficult for the Gentiles. So these rules are not an attempt to make life more miserable for the Gentile believers. This is not like first century Christian like hazing, okay? Oh, you want to be a part of us? Well, we're going to haze you now. So don't eat anything that's been strangled. Like, I don't even know if it's been strangled. Now I have to go ask the butchers if it's been strangled? Like, this is weird. So it's not hazing. And then secondly, James also explains that Moses, remember that's the book of law, kind of synonymous to these people, Moses being who wrote the law, first 5 books, is taught in every city since long ago. So in other words, what he's trying to say there is that there's law-abiding Jews everywhere. So we don't want to make this difficult, but there's Jews everywhere. So how do we go about this? Thus, combining these 3 kind of no-nos along with thinking about the cultural context of the day, these rules were meant to avoid unnecessary conflict between believing Gentiles and believing Jews. And it really was meant to be a sign of true commitment in a Gentile. Are you willing to separate from these things that other Gentiles do? And I would ask that, that's a question that's fair enough for today as well, too. When you become a believer or you are a believer, what things must you separate yourself from that are unbecoming of a believer? Now, again, the mini point that goes along with this, I almost confused myself here. The mini point that goes along with that is the same one as above. Care about other Christians' consciences, okay? Care about other Christians' consciences. Now, let's keep moving. Verse 26. Then Paul took the men, and the last day he purified himself along with them and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled and the offering presented for each one of them. It's interesting here, too, that Paul submits himself to this recommendation by the elders, doesn't it? Like, he's been out there crusading for, like, years, and now he comes back, and the elders are like, hey, we want to, like, kind of wrangle you in a little bit here for the other believers, the Jewish believers. And yet, he humbles himself, and he takes this advice from these other elders. Now, this is really a prime example, too, of Paul living out his own teaching, if you think about it. 1 Corinthians 9:19. For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself actually under the law, and that's kind of like those rituals and stuff, that I might win those under the law. To those outside of the law, the Gentiles, I became as one outside of the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, which is liberty and some freedoms, that I might win those outside the law. Paul likes to write in tongue twisters sometimes. Like, I swear he does it on purpose. To the weak, I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. You see the ending right there? I do it all for the sake of the gospel. That's why he lives the way he lives, and that's why he's doing the things he's doing. It's for the sake of the gospel. It's for the sake of seeing people come to Christ. Now, major point from these three sections, essentially these last little three sections that I broke down here. This is kind of a middle portion here, but this is a major point that cannot be overlooked. I've given you some mini points. This is a major one. The gospel is more important than your personal Christian liberties. And the gospel is more important than your personal Christian conservatism. Now, a little caveat to this. This is kind of a massively dangerous truth in some way, because some people will run away with this and they'll just go off and do whatever they want. But it's even more massively important to build on this truth as a church and evangelizing people around us. So it can be misunderstood and it can be misinterpreted, but it is massively important to living out essentially what is the Great Commission around us. Reason being of all that, if you miss this theology that's going on here, you exponentially cut your ministry field, which is division, in case you're wondering. I was like, how do I say this? I can't say it divides, because that just makes you think two. Like, this is astronomically cutting your ministry field. You will also naturally teach a gospel that is me-centric and warped if you do not carefully take this theology with you and apply it. It turns into something like this. If you don't look like me and you don't sound like me, then you don't get any of my time. And time is absolutely essential to giving the gospel to people, okay? Oftentimes we think of the gospel as like, hey, Jesus loves you, run, and then bam, next one, hey, Jesus loves you, bam. No, the gospel takes time, and time is the most valuable asset we have. Nobody has more time than the other person. You can't buy more time with money unless, like, I don't know, somebody does your laundry for you or something like that, and then I guess you kind of get a couple minutes back. But everybody gets 24 hours, and everybody gets 60 minutes in that hour. So again, if you take this theology here and this doctrine and you warp it to be me-centric about the fact that I'm not going to be all things to all people, and I'm going to cut down who I'm going to essentially spend time with and on, you missed everything. You really have. You missed it all. It's a tragedy. It's a sad thing too, because so many people do that. And the gospel is if you could say the gospel is hampered because of it. I never say that God is hampered in any way, but, there are some things we can do that can magnify, and there are some things we can do that can minimize. And messing this one up is one of those things that can minimize instead of magnify. Now, let's kind of finish this thing up here, down the home stretch. This is the third section of Scripture here that we're kind of going through as the narration continues to shift a little bit in this story. So, when the 7 days were almost completed, and that literally means they were as good as done. That's what that phrase means there. When they were almost completed, that means like they were done. It was as good as done. The Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, literally screaming at the top of their lungs, "Men of Israel, help. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law and this place." You notice the three there. He's just going to throw it all out. The law, the people, the place, the dog, the cat, like everything. And then it's also funny, too. They say teaching everyone everywhere. Like, don't you think that's a little dramatic? Just a little bit. I mean, Paul hasn't been everywhere to every place. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place. For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple. And I could not help but chuckle when I read that. Because isn't that how every good fight starts? With assumptions, right? Like all of the good fights in relationships and life and people start with assumptions. And quite honestly, these guys are being very blatant about it. They're lying. They're flat out lying. And two, okay, also funny, look in there. It says, moreover, he even brought Greeks, plural, Greeks, more than one Greek into the temple. Like Paul's just ushering Greeks into the temple. Like, come on, get in there, everybody get in there. And then they said, for they had previously seen Trophimus. They saw one guy with Paul in the city, not even in the temple, in the city. They really wanted to do away with Paul. So this proves it. There's really nothing new under the sun. The cancel culture is even found in the Bible. Like it's there. They're trying to cancel Paul. They want him gone. It's time for Paul to be gone. They don't like his message. They don't like who he is. They're willing to lie for it, whatever it takes. I mean, they're gathering people up that don't even know what's going on. They're just yelling out like, everybody look. Now, this begs another question here, okay? Two kind of quick little sub-questions. Who are these murder paparazzi Jews from Asia that recognize Paul? And then who is this Trophimus guy, and is he important to the passage at all? Two, I feel like, questions that probably everybody just about asks when you were to read that. So, answer to the first question. The Jews most likely traveled down from Ephesus, where Paul had spent the last 3 years preaching and teaching, okay? So they most likely came down, and it would not be uncommon for Jews to travel back and forth to Jerusalem, so they have come down probably from Ephesus. Now, Trophimus, who's Trophimus real quick? He's one of the 7 Paul takes with him to head from Greece, which is probably Corinth, the city of Corinth, down to Jerusalem, where he is now, okay? So he also does seem to be mentioned by Paul in 2 Timothy. If you look at chapter 4 and verse 20, if you were to flip there, Paul says that he left Trophimus in Miletus because he was sick. So now one of my commentaries that I had did not connect those dots, but some other ones did, so I assume that is what is typically spoken of Trophimus, and that's it. That's all Trophimus gets. He gets 2 mentions. Now, we can kind of conclude something from Trophimus, though, and that is that Trophimus stuck by Paul through some pretty tough stuff, right? Trophimus was a good friend of Paul, okay? Hence why you're seeing him singled out in the city being with Paul. So, and just an interesting note here, think about this. Paul, who once hunted Christians down, right? Saul, who once hunted Christians down, now finds himself hunted down by Jews. Isn't it interesting? Continue to move on here, verse 30. Then all the city was stirred up, and the people ran together. They seized Paul and dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. So temple goes on lockdown. Paul's dragged out before that. Temple goes on lockdown. And I couldn't help but think this is a little bit reminiscent of Stephen's stoning. Stephen is dragged outside of the city by the angry people and stoned to death. So here comes, Act 2 of that scene for the Jews. And this is verse 31, and as they were seeking to kill him, and that phrase that's going on there, it means literally like they were working on it. As they were working on killing him, word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. Now, the tribune is kind of like the guy who's over all the soldiers. Okay, there was a fortress. I think it was of Antonia. I didn't write this down, so please try not to quote me too hard here. But it was essentially connected right to the temple, and they had like lookout towers that could look down on the temple and kind of see inside the temple what was going on, because the temple is laid out with various like increments. Like Jews can go this far, women can go that far, Gentiles, you can use the bathroom on the outside, and so forth and so forth. So the Romans kind of counteract that by building a tower right above it, so they can look down in and see when anything crazy is going on. And then they also can just essentially rush right down to the temple and squash anything that may be happening. Because in that type of a regime, if word gets back to Caesar that some problems are going on in this province, well, you know what Caesar does? Caesar's like, okay, it's time for some people to die, and it's probably going to be everybody. So Romans took their job very seriously on squelching problems in, like, policing themselves, if you will, because they did not want stuff to go to big head honcho Caesar. That's why, you think of the Philippian jailer too, right? When the cell's open and he thinks everybody's run away and he goes to kill himself, well, he doesn't really want to see what's going to happen if he doesn't kill himself. So he thinks it's better, I'm going to just kill myself. Okay, continuing on here. He at once took the soldiers and centurions and ran down, and when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. And the Jews are like, we found him on the ground. He tripped, he fell. That's how he got all of these bruises, officer. Please forgive us. We were just trying to help him. You may have him. Do what you will. And realize this too. Paul dies here if it wasn't for this intervention by God. Paul dies here. This is where Paul dies, were it not for God intervening. And there was another time too where Paul was stoned and they thought he was dead, so they left him alone, and then he hops right back up. God's providence. I already told you about the note of the garrison of soldiers and whatnot that are attached. It's a lot of soldiers too. It's like cavalry and foot soldiers, 1,000, I think like roughly 1,000. Now, let's keep going. 33. Then the tribune, which is the head honcho dude of the guard, came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains, which probably means 2 soldiers, chained to 2 different soldiers. And there's an interesting note here. If you kind of jump ahead to verse 38 of this passage, you'll see, and I don't want to give too much away because Bo will be continuing this on, but you'll see that they actually thought he was like this assassin leader dude who was running around and causing problems for the Jews. And there's some amazing notes about that and who this man was and what they were doing. They were essentially terrorists in Jerusalem at that time. They would hide in crowds, and they would carry knives, and they would like slit people's throats and stab them and kill them and then just drift back into the crowds. So if you're wondering if the stuff we see today is anything new, it's not at all. So there's a lot of civil unrest kind of going on in this time period because of those people and that terrorist group. there's a lot of political tension as well that's happening too. So they arrest him thinking that he's this leader due to the Egyptians. 33 continued. He inquired, this is the Tribune, he inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd were shouting one thing, some another, and as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought back to the barracks. Now, at this particular verse right there, verse 34, he could not learn the facts because of the uproar. Every parent and every teacher in this room and hearing my voice should know exactly what's going on here. The fighting is ensuing, the yelling, you can't separate what's going on, and finally you send everybody to their corners or whatever. Well, he can't quite do that here because this is an angry mob at this point. So he orders everybody to go back to the barracks. And when they came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. So the crowd didn't actually try to leave Paul alone when they came down. They were still in the process of really wanting to end Paul's life. So they actually pick Paul up and carry him where he needs to go. For the mob of people followed, crying out, "Away with him." And the words "away with them" doesn't just mean like, hey, just get this guy out of here, take him away. No, away with him meant, let's go kill this guy. Away with him, let's kill him. We need this guy dead. And I tell you what, man, the Jews in this time period, they did not mess around when it came to taking care of business for the Lord, man. Like, we think we saw that guy bring a Gentile into the temple, and we're pretty sure that his tunic is on inside out. So we're going to need to go ahead and stone this guy and get rid of him because this is bad. So you don't mess around with the Jews back in that time. They were very zealous for the Lord. And then interesting thought, too, that rolled through my mind. This is very reminiscent of the Jews' reaction to Christ, isn't it? Away with him, right? They're following him, the mob, away with him, away with him. And again, it's implied here, kill him, right? They were yelling, crucify Jesus. Here, away with him, get rid of him. Now, this brings me to my final question here. We have made it through all billion verses that we just covered. Final question here. What is going on in these last 20 verses or so that we just blew through? And is there a central theme that can be caught in this entire passage that we just looked at? Is there something there for that? And I think there is. Again, looking ahead a little bit, you kind of have to make sense of this. Acts 23:11 narrates something for us, and it says this: the following night the Lord stood by him, Paul, and said, "Take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." And here's the main point of this passage, I believe. God had a purpose for Paul's life, and he was leading him to it and through it. Just like God has a plan for your life, and he's leading you to it and through it. You got to think about it. Paul just came from Rome. Like his whole mission was to get to Jerusalem before, I think it was Pentecost. So he's trying to get there. His whole mission is to get from Rome to Jerusalem before Pentecost, which is, hundreds of miles, boat rides, all that fun stuff. And now he's being told, just a short distance from the story that we just looked at, no, now you're going to go back to Rome again. Only this time you're going to do it as a prisoner, and you're going to testify of the gospel there. Now, put yourself in Paul's shoes here for a second. I know, they didn't have shoes back then. I hate it when they go put yourself in his sandals. It's like, such a cliche at this point for preachers to say. Put yourself in his shoes. Pretend he had shoes. with me, embellish a little bit with me here. Would you be super excited to hear this news? No, I don't think I would personally. I don't think I would be happy about this news. I think it would be right around now that I probably would have been like, okay, I think enough is enough. I made it to Jerusalem. I gave them the money. I basically almost made it through this vow before these pesky Jews showed up and ruined everything. I think I just want to stay here now and be done. Another 400-mile boat trip back to Rome as a prisoner? No, thank you, please. Now, kind of a mini point here to pull out of this, a sub-point to what we're talking about. There is a theme in Scripture that everything that happens in a person's life is not some stroke of chance. I'm going to give us a couple verses here. Proverbs 21:1. The king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. So his providence only stops at rulers? Is that what the point is there of that? No, it doesn't stop at just rulers. Psalm 37:23 and 24. The steps of a man are established by the Lord when he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, or the Lord upholds his hand. I think that should be for the Lord upholds his hand. Psalm 104:21. The young lion roars for their prey, seeking their food from God. I mean, even the animals depend on God's providence and his sovereignty. Romans 11:32. For God has consigned, which you could say delivered, God has consigned all to disobedience, that he may have mercy on all. And again, that's pointing at just the fact that God has his providence sprinkled on everything. It's all for a purpose. The good, the bad for the bad, it's all for a purpose. And just kind of note here that there's two sides of this providential coin, if you will. There's those that trust in God, and he leads to protection and life after death. And then there's those who don't trust in God, who he essentially hands over to frustration and more death after death. God throws providential curveballs at each one of us. And the goal is always the same, that we may magnify God through them. Some choose to curse him because of them. Others choose to trust him because of them. Consider for yourself, what side of the coin do you want to be on? You know, if you still have questions about this, I hope that you would go and ask somebody. Be brave enough to ask somebody about it. Because there's a whole lot that I just fleshed right there, and that's a lot to take in for people, especially an unbeliever. If you're a believer and you have questions, I would hope that you would ask and also study yourself. Get in there and dig in and figure things out. But as an unbeliever, again, I would pray that you would have the courage to kind of seek out the answer to these things for yourself and what it means. And then again, consider what side of the coin do you want to be on.